We have a special guest today, and it's Dr. Francis Fukuyama. Thank you for being with us. You have talked a lot and explored the idea of how states fail or succeed based on their capacity or legitimacy. I would like to explore with you how the failure of these states usually leads to the rise of populism.
Okay, sure. So I think you've actually defined two routes by which populism can arise. So let's begin with legitimacy. So government in a democracy is based on consent of the governed. And if people take away that consent and don't believe that the people ruling them have a right to be there, then they're going to withdraw their support and the government will fail, right? So that's the legitimacy part. The capacity part is why you have governments. You don't have governments just to follow certain procedures. You want governments to do stuff. You want physical security. You want things like health, education. You want a good environment, opportunities for economic development of every single individual. And oftentimes, governments that might be legitimate fail to actually produce real results. And so I think that you really need to have both of those. You have to have a government that gets the consent of the governed, but it also has to be effective in doing things. And the two things are related, because if you have repeated failures to accomplish things that people want, then they're not going to vote for you. They're going to withdraw their consent. They're going to say, these people are out of touch, elites, and let's get rid of them and replace them by something else.
So when government then fail to produce or give a fairness to the citizens or basic services.
It's not just fairness. I mean, of course we want fairness, but it's maybe concrete thing like, you have to build bridges and roads. You have to have physical security. Like in many democracies, people don't feel safe. You have to provide education,
So then people would start losing their faith in the institutions.
That's right. Right.
So when that happens, they start demanding dignity, as you say. So do you see that the loss of dignity of the citizens due to their the institution failing them, do you think that there is an emotional fuel behind populist movements?
Yeah, no, definitely. So, in many democracies, there are entire neighborhoods that have been neglected by the government, right? The schools are failing, the infrastructure doesn't work, there's graffiti everywhere, public security is nowhere to be found, right? And that's a big failure in terms of producing actual results, and that, leads people to say, who are these people that are claim to be representing us? They're not doing that anymore, and we need to replace them.
If we look back at the Arab Spring or the revolutions that happened in some Arab countries, Egypt, Tunisia, there was transitions and they were doomed because the new leaders or the new governments also failed to provide anti-corruption promises or couldn't dismantle what has been done by previous governments. Would that be able to be restored, or populist movements usually just raise sloganeerings without any promises or actions?
Well, no, I mean, they do promise, and sometimes they actually deliver. I think one of the biggest failures in the Arab Spring, in a way the most tragic one, was in Tunisia, where, the Ben Ali dictatorship was universally hated, so you get a new coalition government legitimately elected, but they couldn't provide jobs. Young Tunisians had no opportunities because they didn't have the right kinds of economic policies that would actually allow the economy to expand. And for that reason, a lot of the young men decided to leave. They joined Al-Qaeda. People voted for the Islamist Party, but even the Islamist Party was part of a coalition that didn't look like it was effective, and so you get much more radicalism, and then eventually you get a dictator,
Do you see any similarities between what happened in the Arab Spring and these states in the Arab world and Western democracies where perceived unfairness or failed promises to the citizens or how the elite sometimes in these governments, specifically in Western democracies, capture those promises, and then this would erode the trust, so the legitimacy, and then also it opens the door to populist backlash when the elite fail to deliver?
It's not just in the West. It's also in the Middle East. It's in Latin America. It's in Europe. So it's a kind of universal problem if governments don't actually fail to deliver on their real promises. The thing is that even when they deliver, sometimes you still have problems and actually I think this is where technology and social media come to play, because if you think about the United States over the last decade, the country is actually doing pretty well. Unemployment is really, really low. We had a bout of inflation, but we had much, much bigger inflation in the 1970s, And so I do think that there's a way where social media allows people to live in a kind of self-contained information bubble, and people start saying, things have never been worse, we're losing our country, and people, echo that, and even though it's objectively not the case, it produces support for populist policies.
And what do you think the point of no return, the threat that would demolish all democratic institutions in the world? Today, there is a rise, as you said, in populism. How much would that threatens democracy, threaten liberal democracies? And is there a point of no return? Are we living in it, or are we going to witness it?
Well, so there's a couple of stages. So the first is illiberal policies, where you shut down free media, you shut down criticism, you go after, people that don't like, the current government. But there's a second point where the democracy fails. Once you can manipulate the laws and the rules, then the next election you can stack it in your favor so that your party never loses an election. And so both of those are really important transition points, going from a real liberal democracy to a dictatorship.
How can we, in the world we live in, whether it's policy community or politicians or even citizens, if they care about their rights, their dignity, their fairness in the system, what should they do today, do you think?
Well, look, if you're living in a country that still has reasonably free and fair elections, there's just one answer to that, which is you go vote. And you convince all your friends to vote, and you organize and you mobilize people, right? Because that can still pull things out. If you're in a country like Venezuela, where they basically had a free and fair election, and then the regime just canceled it, then you've got a much tougher problem.
But also, in Russia, they say they have elections. In Turkey, they say they have elections. In Syria, during Bashar al-Assad, they said they had elections.
Those countries have already gone over the point where they can actually have a free and fair election. In the United States, I don't think we're at that point yet.
What about other countries, like other Western countries or European countries? In Hungary, there is a lot of fear.
Well, it depends on the specific country. I think that Hungary still has a chance. Peter Magyar broke from Viktor Orban, and he founded, his own political movement. And according to the polls, they're actually more popular than Orban's Fidesz. And so even in Hungary, you can still use an election, to stop a dictator. So I don't think, this is really important for people that believe in liberal democracy. You shouldn't give up prematurely, because at a certain point there is a point of no return, like Russia is there now. But in many other countries, you can still win elections.
You talked about people who believe in liberal democracies. They should do these steps that you mentioned. Why do you think there are people who do not believe in liberal democracies, which they don't believe in fairness in the society, they don't believe in the institutions should work for them, and they go over and after populist movements? So,
first of all, I think there are not actually very many people in the world that don't believe in some form of democracy, right? There are very few movements that say, well, this particular group of people is superior to everybody else, and they should have, rule over everyone. People just don't believe that. What they do attack is the liberal part of liberal democracy, meaning restrictions on the power of the government. So you have many populist movements that are elected in reasonably free and fair elections, and then the leader, and this is Viktor Orban or Donald Trump, they got up and say, well, the people elected me to do such and such, like close the border or whatever, and these journalists, these courts, these judges are standing in my way, and we have to destroy them. And that's the point at which you attack the liberal part. The liberal part of liberal democracy are constraints on the government.
How much do you think people are fed up from politics that uses their identity to achieve their gains, which is accused? It's an accusation against the liberal elites.
Well, first of all, I think that identity politics, as it developed, is illiberal. Because liberalism is based on a premise that all human beings, qua human beings, have an equal dignity that needs to be protected by the state. And the moment that you start distinguishing between racial, ethnic, gender, different kinds of groups, all of a sudden you strayed into a kind of illiberalism. And I think what's happened in this country on the right, for example, the identity politics in that sense started on the left, but it's now gravitated to the right, where you got white people saying, oh, we white people are being discriminated against. This ridiculous thing of inviting these white Afrikaners from South Africa to come to the United States, as if they're the most persecuted minority in the world. It's just total BS. But I think that's kind of the corrosive nature of this kind of identity politics, is that anybody can then portray themselves as a victim and, an oppressed minority that's been marginalized.
My last question is about the last two books. How much there is similarities in the message, and what is the message in your book to our audience and to everyone who cares about their rights in the current modern societies?
Well, my book, Identity, was really about exactly what I was just explaining, that identity politics is understandable. Everybody has an identity, but when it becomes an essential determinant of who you think you are, then it's bad for a liberal democracy, because that's built on a premise of equality. The liberalism book talked about what I think are two distortions of liberalism. So one was what's called neoliberalism, which is a kind of extreme form of market economics that produced a lot of inequality, a lot of instability. And the other is, frankly, identity politics, which is fundamentally illiberal in many respects. And I think one was a right-wing phenomenon, the other was a left-wing phenomenon, and between the two, they kind of undermine support for, a moderate classical form of liberalism.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Okay.
And I, myself, and a lot of our viewers are definitely huge fans.
Okay.
And I can't wait to finish reading your book.
All right. Very good.
And a signature.
Yeah, okay. Excellent.
Thank you.